Future of Energy Forum. Please be seated. The session will begin momentarily. A reminder that Tulane University promotes and protects the free exchange of ideas. Freedom of expression includes the ability to engage or not to engage in the exchange, examination, and discussion of ideas. It does not include the right to disrupt the freedom of others. Therefore, we prohibit the physical or virtual disruption, shouting down, blocking, or suppressing of a protest, a demonstration, program, or an invited speaker's right to speak. Please note that disruptions of this nature may result in the removal from the event.
Good afternoon, and welcome to Tulane University. It is my pleasure to introduce our last session, Community-Driven Strategies to Expand Reliable Energy Access. If time allows, at the end of the session, the panel will take questions submitted by the audience. To submit a question, please scan the QR code located on the screen. Please be sure to silence your cell phones. Enjoy the conversation, and please join me in giving a warm welcome to our moderator, Matt Candler.
All right, yeah. Let's clap. We all made it to the end of the day, and you showed up, right? Former middle school math teacher. This is like teaching math at 3 p.m., so respect to y'all for being here. Out of respect for the Colusa tribe, I want to acknowledge that we're on land that was inhabited by folks who preceded us thousands of years ago. I hope I pronounced this correctly, but the trading zone around New Orleans was referred to originally as Bull Bancha, which I am curious to learn more about after the session. But I'm thrilled that you're here because I think you're going to hear a story about harnessing the potential of renewables and storage and some of the emerging technologies that I think have gotten less attention over the last 3 days than they deserve. I was struck by the CEO of Shell illustrating yesterday that what she thinks about all the time is renewables in her portfolio and how to add them to it. This is the work that she's concerned with, and that really resonated with me. And I think you're going to hear a story from Ken, and then you hear a story from Larry, and then you hear a story from me, and then we're going to open it up. And I would encourage you to think about a continuum from Ken's story on lands that their tribe owns and has rights to, all the way down to the story that I'll tell you about Community Lighthouse here in New Orleans, where we have less control over the land and the assets that we're trying to leverage for the benefit of the members of our communities. So with that, I'll ask, what we'll do is Ken will introduce himself and then tell you the story of what Colusa's doing to harness energy and leverage it for their community. Larry will follow up with a really cool story from Hawaii, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on here in New Orleans. And I encourage you, there's a whole pot of snacks and candy in that green room that I will give out to people who have the courage to do a Q&A. So you'll get your pick. There's some chips and some pretty good candy in there. So if you ask a question, I will rifle through there and bring you some candy at the end of the session. So thanks for being here, and I'm thrilled to introduce to you Ken Ahmann from the Colusa tribe. Ken,
thanks,
take it
Matt.
away.
Yeah, I appreciate that. My name's Ken Ahmann. I'm not from the tribe. I work for the tribe.
Appreciate you clarifying that. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So obviously not a tribal member, but I am the Chief Operating Officer of Colusa Indian Energy, which is the only tribally owned microgrid developer in the country. I've been a staff guy for the tribe. It's the Cashel-Dehe Band of Wintun Indians of the Colusa Rancheria, which is a mouthful, so we just call it the Colusa tribe. I've been a staff guy of theirs for about 20 years, actually, now. And this tribe resides about an hour north of Sacramento in California. I arrived on the reservation in December of 2004 to help finish construction on a new natural gas-fired cogeneration power plant. The reason the tribe hired us to build this was because PG&E, who is the IOU in that service territory, who we lovingly refer to as Pacific Greed and Extortion, averaged over 50 power interruptions per year to this little tribe, just an hour north of the state's capital. Some of the worst outage rates in the country. And these were quantifiable outages, so actual interruptions were, voltage sags in the hundreds per year. They also lacked capacity for the tribe to be able to expand their casino resort, modest gaming facility, and to build their first hotel. And so instead of handing PG&E tens of millions of dollars to upgrade their own infrastructure with no ownership, no performance guarantee, the tribe decided to invest in their own energy sovereignty. So tribal energy sovereignty is this big buzzword across Indian country today, but this was 20 years ago. So pretty progressive line of thought. And so the company that I work for was hired to build this cogen power plant. Before I arrived in Colusa, I had my hands in the construction, management, operation of over 50 different cogen microgrids across the country. And this is the last one that I helped build because the tribe asked me to come to work for them directly after commissioning of this project to manage and expand a true microgrid. So super long story short, we've voluntarily operated this entire reservation completely off-grid for 2 decades. And we've done so with 0 power interruptions at all in over 13 years, making us a global leader in utility uptime. All of the assets are owned and operated by the tribe under a tribal utility authority that I helped them create. So we power a casino resort, tribal administrative campus, medical clinic, water treatment plants, all of the tribal members' housing, thousands of acres of agricultural loads. Every single load, light switch on the entire reservation is powered by the tribe's own tribal utility authority using its own microgrid. Today, it's a 9.1 megawatt capacity microgrid. So there's 6 megawatts of combined heat and power and 1.1 megawatts of solar PV, 2 megawatts of battery energy storage with a 4 megawatt central battery UPS system, conditioning and backing up all the loads, 10 megawatts of diesel backup, 100% underground distribution to all loads. Originally, we tried negotiating with PG&E to purchase the existing distribution across the tribe's lands. And they sent a senior vice president to my office to tell me that they're not in the business of handing over a single square foot of service territory to anybody. And then they got a lesson in tribal sovereignty. So then the answer was, okay, fine, but it's going to be 10x the fair market value for this dilapidated, poorly maintained, 50-year-old overhead distribution system. And so I went to the Department of Energy, the Office of Indian Energy, and secured a 90% grant to start trenching in parallel alongside their lines. And then called PG&E to disconnect 3 or 4 homes at a time. So they'd send a lineman out. A week later, we would call and disconnect 3 or 4 more homes. They send a lineman out. We did this 8 or 9 weeks in a row until finally somebody's like, hey, wait a minute, what's going on out here? And at the end of it, we got PG&E to completely roll their entire distribution network off of the res at no cost to the tribe. That's the moment that we evicted them completely. So now, using that template, I helped the tribe form a Section 17 for-profit enterprise called Colusa Indian Energy, where 100% of the profits that we generate come back to the small native community that we serve, with the mission of kind of spreading the gospel of tribal energy sovereignty, promoting tribal member workforce development, but ultimately to act as a firewall between tribes and non-tribal entities in the energy infrastructure space. And so that's my full-time job now for the last couple of years. Today we're in development with nearly 60 different tribes across the country, from Alaska to Long Island, Southern California, everywhere in between. Some non-tribal governments, some big corporate clients, data center companies. It's kind of exploded overnight. But yeah, that's my story. That's who I am. Larry?
Great. Although you may have evicted PG&E, but I think that they still come to visit whenever they shut their own power off.
That's true, yeah. So PG&E has, in California, we have these PSPS events, Public Safety Power Shutoff. So PG&E is a company that is now a convicted felon of a corporation. They're burning our cities to the ground and blowing our neighborhoods up and posting $2.25 billion profits in the midst of their second bankruptcy. So when they decide to shut the power off when the wind blows and it's hot because they don't want to burn another town to the ground, it affects entire regions of the state. And during those outages, PG&E actually sets up at Colusa's home microgrid for their outage response because they know we're the only ones that are going to have power. So.
Right. And how's that for resilience, right? So, I think that's a fantastic story, and it's an amazing way that tribes exercised and flexed on the limited power that they've been granted in a very positive way to be able to build sovereignty. And when you think outside of tribes, there are all kinds of underserved neighborhoods throughout the country that are not tribes that are experiencing a lot of the similar problems of inconsistent service, multiple outages, just serious problems, but they are not and can never be sovereigns. And so what can they do? And an experiment was launched in Hawaii with small communities and banding together to deal with the exact same problems. So there's a small village on the leeward side of Molokai, one of the islands in Hawaii, that is called Ho'ahu. And Ho'ahu is about 300 or so homes, so very, very small, primarily, if not entirely, Native Hawaiians, not a tribe, but Native Hawaiians, and they are desperately poor, and they are underemployed, and they were having frequent power cutoffs when vegetation was interfering with power lines or wind events. Just as simply, they had a poorly functioning energy system from their home utility, which is Hawaiian Electric. And so what they wound up doing was banding together and saying, we've got to fix this as a community. How do we get this done? And they worked together to develop a part of their community as a solar farm. And so they have home-based solar. They had a lot of trouble installing solar on their roofs because in that part of Hawaii and throughout a lot of Hawaii, they have what's called single wall construction. It is just simply one sheet of plywood between the inside of the house and the outside of the house. And that's it. No insulation, no anything else. I mean, it's Hawaii, I guess it makes sense in that regard, but the problem was structural strength to support the incredible weight of solar panels. So they needed to have ground-mounted systems. They needed to have these panels installed on rooftops of civic buildings and schools. And by the time they figured out what all these costs were, they realized they needed to come together as a community to be able to figure out how they're going to afford this so that they can cut themselves off from the grid and have that kind of microgrid independent security. They got grants, they got some loans, they were able to kick in from their own personal funds, each house contributing a bit and taking out loans secured against their own homes to be able to afford the initial installation of this. And we're fortunate enough to meet with a community-minded, independently wealthy individual of Hawaiian origin, not from Molokai, but from Oahu, who said, okay, I will make sure that this happens, and worked as essentially their financier to be able to take what they'd collected and been granted and loaned thus far, and to extend the rest of the money to them. And part of the deal that they didn't know about was he committed that of the profits he would earn from the interest charged, he was going to take half of that and plow it back directly into the community and give it to them as a group so that they would be able to make a decision each year on the part of the payback that they had paid in, that they would then be able to decide how they wanted to spend that money within their own community. And they are now not only energy independent, but they are producers of energy and sending electricity to Hawaiian Electric, who buys it, and they buy that electricity, and that adds now to this, since the financing is fully paid off at this point, they are now adding that to enrich their community by being able to pay for teacher salaries, musical instruments for kids in school, enhancements to the fire department, things of this nature. And so it's really, truly a success story on a small scale, but it's the kind of thing that can be repeated. And I think that it takes a lot of organization. It takes somebody being generous and community-minded, but those people are out there. If you find the right partner, you might be able to get this done as well. And I think that leads to Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. This is such a cool story. Ballpark it for me at 300 homes. Is that around 3 megawatts? Is that kind of where we're
Yes,
at?
yes. I think they're in. I think they're 4 megawatts because they're overproducing their own
Right,
need.
they're clearly because they're giving some extra back to the
Right,
grid.
right.
Cool. That's
And
awesome.
the community's not really growing particularly in terms of population size. It's about level.
Awesome. Well, let me tell you a story about a similar project here in New Orleans. So 4 years ago, we had a storm called Ida. It came through and knocked out power for about 3.5 weeks. Who here was living in New Orleans during Ida? How long was your power out, sir? 1 week. How long was your 1 week? How long was yours out? Month.
Dang.
John? 10 days. So that was the first storm here in New Orleans where there was any substantial solar and residential storage installed in Orleans Parish. So there were probably less than 100 homes in New Orleans that were able to withstand or get through that storm, or I would say the aftermath of that storm, by relying on solar on their roof and batteries on the outside of their house. And so while their neighbors were probably running, either they were just getting by with no power, other neighbors were getting by with generators plugged into some of their loads, others with full home generators, typically running on natural gas. There were a handful of homes around the city that were getting by with solar, charging up and taking care of the daytime loads, and then putting enough into the batteries to get through each night. And there's a really fascinating community within New Orleans called Together New Orleans. This is a collective of about 100 nonprofits and houses of faith that for the last 30 or 40 years has been doing just really high quality neighborhood activism, everything from voter registration to advocating for the school board to leverage their capacity to veto state relief on taxes with corporations, for example. So it's a really tremendous organization. The church that I go to as a part of this organization, and I had started going to Together New Orleans meetings and was thrilled to just kind of get into it and see this really remarkable collective of citizens. I found it fascinating. A former educator, I moved here to work on rebuilding schools after Katrina. And so for me, getting to know the Together Louisiana community felt uniquely New Orleanian. We're not a tribe, nor are we a collective of native Hawaiians, but we are a collection of New Orleans citizens who are trying to do something together as a community. So there was an opportunity, the pastors and the heads of the synagogues and mosques that were in that collective had gotten into the habit of hanging out on Zoom after COVID. And there were a lot of Zoom calls after that storm in the 3-4 weeks where we didn't have power. Some of those congregations were dark, some of them were lit back up. And the concept of storage and solar came into that conversation. And so there was a small amount of money raised and to study it, and then the Greater New Orleans Foundation came in with $1 million, and then the mayor came in with $1 million from a fund we refer to as the Wisner Fund, a sort of flexible side pot of money that the mayor gets to work on. And then Troy Carter got involved, and suddenly we had enough money to build 16 of these. The plan was to build 85. We have a map of the city that shows you that there's a lighthouse within a 1-mile radius of any spot in Orleans Parish. And by the time Francine came around last year, this is a storm that scraped the west side of town, ran through uptown, and parts of Lakeview, and Gentilly got a little bit of that wind as well. We had 10 of these lighthouses operational, plugged into the grid, and able to sustain themselves throughout the outage that followed that storm. I was housed in our church on the west side, not far away from here. There's another church about a mile away, Broadmoor Community Church. And because we were on the west side of town, we got crushed. We had neighbors from those neighborhoods and the 3 or 4 neighborhoods around showing up to get food, get their meds, get water, cool off, charge their phones, take a charger, a small portable charging pack home so that they could get through the night. Meanwhile, we had folks on the east side of town. New Orleans East doesn't have many trees after an event that happened here 20 years ago. And they were just sitting there ready to rock, but nobody showed up. And so even in that Ida storm, we started to see what a network of microgrids could look like and how could it operate as opposed to just each individual site sort of sitting on their own. So I've got a list of 100 questions for Ken, who's been doing this for far longer than we have. But we are a host here in New Orleans to the largest network of microgrids in the country. I think that's a title I don't want to take away from Ken, because if you talked about all the microgrids that y'all have inspired, that network wins. But I think the fabric upon which each of these microgrid networks has been established to me is absolutely fascinating. And there is so much knowledge way over there on that side of the panel that I hope you ping with questions. We are seeing what the future of energy looks like in these 3 stories. And you see the power of renewables plus storage to create value for the citizens that are proximate to it. We have not talked about transmission here because we don't need to transmit electricity that is located near the load. Mm-hmm. And that story of Ken cleverly moving PG&E off their lands, off Colusa's lands, is an example of what, when we start to generate closer and closer to load, we can take out tremendous costs from the economics of generating energy in one spot and moving it over long distances to where the people are. And that to me is just fascinating and really exciting, and I'm inspired by the work you've done.
Thanks.
I'm inspired, Larry, by the work that you have been doing and studying and highlighting here. And so I will stop rambling on and open the floor. I will just clarify that when you ask a question, if you could also tell me what your favorite candy is, I will do my best to hook you up.
You are a former math teacher.
Yes, afternoon math classes. This is our rule. Larry.
Before we get to that, though,
sure.
And I hate to restrict anyone's candy intake, but but there are 2 things I wanted to point out that you heard from both Ken's and Matt's story, which was when the power goes out, but a less than affluent neighborhood still has it, guess what happens? The people who need the power go there, and they start spending money there. And so local businesses are profiting from the ability to still have power when the power goes out elsewhere. And that is an amazing part of having that level of energy independence. And so that's the first thing I wanted to add to the conversation that you've heard so far. Then I also wanted to bring up one additional topic, something that Ken and I work on together and we're very passionate about. Heard from Matt's question, some of you were out without power for a week, 10 days, a month. Imagine if you've been out of power your entire life, and your parents' entire lives, and grandparents, going back 100 years. As long as there's been power, no one in your family has ever had it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about some remote village in a third world country somewhere. I'm talking about Arizona, New Mexico, and it's unfortunately a tremendous and terrible, terrible problem. Many Native American tribes just simply don't have sufficient power. Together, Ken and I helped to found Tribal Energy Solutions, a not-for-profit that is looking to solve energy problems like this on Native American lands. And our first project is with the Navajo, where only 2 out of every 3 homes actually has power.
It's 13,500 plus families on the Navajo Nation have never had any access to electricity. And nationwide, right, it's 1.4% of Americans have never had power, which is crazy enough, but in Native American numbers, 14%. It's 10 times the national average. So the whole purpose or mission of Tribal Energy Solutions is to find funding and technical solutions to help alleviate that.
Exactly. And so we're a relatively new organization, just getting started. We've very recently gotten our 501c3 tax-free status, so donations are welcome. I'm not asking right now, and it's not in exchange for candy. But the idea is to solve these major problems. And 13,000 some odd families. When they say a family, they don't mean mom, dad, and 2.5 kids. They're talking 4 generations living together, minimum 20 people. So you're looking at 200,000 to 300,000 Americans with no power. We've done a lot of organization here at Tulane to support the work of Tribal Energy Solutions. Tulane Law School was the first in the country to require pro bono service as a condition of graduation. And I'm very happy to say that we've organized thousands of hours of student pro bono hours to work on solutions on the legal side for the Navajo, and it's an amazing experience for them. I think something that inspires the students quite a lot is when I say, when a professor assigns something and it's due a week from Friday at noon, you get all upset. Imagine when the real deadline is when the battery in your device runs out because there's nowhere to plug it in. Now that's a deadline. And so that, I think, gets people motivated to want to help, and they are helping. And the student contributions have been really fantastic, very high quality. I think it's something that Tulane should take a lot of pride in doing this work and continuing service both to tribes as well as to other needy organizations that need this kind of pro bono service. And so if you want to learn more about Tribal Energy Solutions, we've got a website, and I think it's a really good one. And thanks a lot to the contributions of Colusa in making that happen.
Yeah, thanks especially to Larry for spearheading Tulane's pro bono efforts here, and also to Pace University. They've been a big help out of the Northeast. But yeah, really appreciate you mentioning that. I think that's the most critical work we're doing, obviously. But yeah, happy to take any questions or
congrats
comments.
All right, y'all. If you are not eating candy right now, I will donate the value of your candy bar to Tribal Energy Solutions.
We do have one question from the web. For the battery storage, what method have you found to be best for these microgrids?
Ken, you want to tell the story of storage on y'all's?
What method for battery storage? Well, there's a lot, I guess. If we're talking about technology, there are lots of different battery technologies today that didn't exist when we installed our central battery UPS system 13 years ago on the Colusa reservation. And so back then, all that really existed was this, flooded wet cell lead acid battery, this 100-year-old technology that you'll find in, utility substations all over the place. Tried and true, but not ideal for a number of reasons. One is they're pretty intense on maintenance requirements, so we have to have operators comb through the room every single day, checking water levels, making sure that everything looks and smells, normal. They're constantly off-gassing sulfur dioxide, one of the deadliest gases on the planet. So if the HVAC system in that room shuts down, our operators have to suit up in SCBAs just to enter the room to diagnose, what's going wrong. Not an ideal solution for some remote community or maybe people who don't have the level of technical expertise that we've cultivated over the years. Fortunately, today we don't sell those battery systems to anybody. Lithium ion is pretty much the industry standard. A lot of tribes that we develop with have significant ethical concerns about the way that lithium is mined, and so we have alternative solutions like graphene, nickel-based flow batteries that are non-toxic, non-hazardous. They've got far fewer ethical concerns, but quite a bit more expensive, right? They can be 2 or 3 times as expensive. However, in California, where I live, the state is incentivizing the development of these alternative battery technologies. And so tribes especially are benefiting from significant grant dollars coming from the California Energy Commission and other agencies. And so that's been helpful as well. But as far as battery storage, there's a lot of different options. And I would also caution there's a lot of fly-by-night solutions operating out there. We dealt with one a year ago who, closed up shop and filed bankruptcy in the middle of the night, basically. Just never heard from them again, and we were in the midst of a massive development. So, I would just try to, be cautious and make sure you're dealing with reputable companies and do your diligence on the actual, technical side of what it is they're offering to make sure that it's legitimate.
In Hawaii, the solution was the lithium ion. They also were not happy with the ethical implications. They're also very concerned about the fire implications, especially with high heat, high humidity. They're not worried so much about the cold. It's Hawaii, but they are very concerned about that. But their units are basically newer units, so they are sort of the best of the second generation kind of lithium ion batteries. But they are very hopeful about the development of sort of fourth generation batteries, which are sodium ion. So sodium's plentiful, and there are generally no ethical considerations with regard to harvesting sodium. And so this is something that they're waiting for the scalability and marketability of the sodium ion. They're also markedly safer. You don't have the runaway thermal, right, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, another benefit of sodium is that you have much lower maintenance costs. You can simplify the electronics that need to keep those things balanced over time. So, some cool technologies. One of my third jobs, I've a few different projects I'm in, but I'm an investor in battery storage. I'll tell you one quick story from my portfolio. We have a company based in Lancaster, California, North LA County, and we operate a battery plant there. It's an 8 megawatt connection with a 4-hour battery. We have a plant in Santa Barbara County, and we just broke ground on a San Antonio plant in ERCOT. All of these plants are solar attached, but they are made up of used electric car battery packs. And so we've found that there are tons of economic value in these packs for another decade or so after they have served their purpose originally designed to push a car around. And so if you can imagine a retirement home for batteries, we do a couple of things there. We're adding another decade to the life. We're keeping that battery out of the landfill for at least another decade. We're giving the recycling community a chance to figure out how they might recycle and extract the resources within that battery. And then we're, of course, giving the original developer of that battery, the OEM or the battery manufacturer, relief from the California regs that they are responsible for that asset, for the life of that asset. So that's one example. And then I think just back to that Francine story, I don't think batteries on wheels are economic yet in many places, but this storm was an example to me of, if hypothetically, let's say the congregations on the east side of New Orleans had a smaller battery, and instead of all of their battery being stationary attached to the building, let's say that a third of their battery was attached to the building and the 70% was in a bus that they were using for their congregation, or maybe even a yellow school bus that was moving kids around. That's a good example as you start to think about the network of the microgrid, and we're not really relying on transmission lines. It would have been awesome to take those batteries and fill those buses up with the volunteers that were highly trained sitting there twiddling their thumbs on the east side of New Orleans and drive them over to the west and help that part of the city. So, again, I think when we start to decouple these resources from the grid that we built, that was designed to leverage combustion of fossil fuels, which are magical. You cannot deny the energy density magic that comes with fossil fuels. But as we start to pair them with 4 to 5 times more efficient electric motors and induction and the technologies that we can pair renewables with, you see some really, really cool, clever ways to put power in the hands of citizens without having to rely on that grid. So those are some great examples. I love that. I can imagine, Ken, you've probably got 20 other stories about how storage and flexibility has played out.
Yeah,
Anything else you
absolutely.
wanna
I
share?
think, yeah, specifically the batteries on wheels. We've got a partner in a company called Martin Energy that they actually sell, mobile or rent mobile battery energy storage solutions, and we're looking very closely at those for the outage-prone areas, especially in California, with tribes, right? So there are still tribes that are suffering from these PSPS events. This year, there's a massive tribe in Southern California, right off of I-10, that their entire reservation was out of power for 5 days, and this affecting, not just the general membership or their businesses, but you've got elders and people who are dependent on life-saving medical devices or whatever, and when you have a reservation or any other community where you've got 500-600 homes clustered together, do you really want 500 or 600 generators running for 5 days? And so these battery solutions, especially the mobile ones, are of particular interest. My favorite battery, I think, today is what the Yakima Nation has invested in up in Washington State. It's basically rocks on wheels, and it's called the Aries system. And it's these massive stones that they drag up a hill, and then there's your stored potential energy. And then when they need to release the energy, they roll the things down the hill.
Love it.
Yeah, and this at the multiple megawatt scale, right? So similar to pumped hydro storage, I love that idea as well. Where we can not necessarily have to rely on rare earth minerals and the excavation of those, and think a little bit more simpler, but also creatively, I think is pretty cool. So I'm looking forward to that project coming online.
Oh, I can't wait to hear about that one.
There's a similar technology. Oh, we got a question.
Yeah, fire. Is what? Vodka. Okay.
That's our favorite candy.
I didn't see that in the green room, but I will work on that. Okay.
Larry had some in his bag earlier. He told me not to
Yes.
say anything.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
Any work in? No, we're not doing any work with any tribes in Florida. We're as a formal for-profit enterprise, we are almost to the day 2 years old,
Wow.
and we've got almost $16 billion in the development pipeline. And so we have, we started west of the Rockies. We really started in Northern California in like a couple of counties and thought we would build a couple of arrays for some neighboring tribes, and it just exploded with interest overnight. So we're very quickly scaling up. I think today we've got 70 employees. We just purchased an entire engineering firm. So we have headquarters in Northern California. We've got a big office in San Diego County. Our major presence is in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we're just still kind of crawling out to the East Coast. So I think the only tribe that we're developing with on the East Coast is the Shinnecock Nation in New York on Long Island today. But if you have any connections there, I've absolutely, love to talk to them.
And if your question was aimed at Tribal Energy Solutions, a charitable organization, the idea there is right now we're trying to tackle the largest energy justice issue, which is with the Navajo. We gave you some statistics earlier, but basically 3/4 of all Americans who have no access to electricity live on that one reservation. And so that's why that's the focus right now. We figure if we can tackle that, we can help everybody else and prove it. So that's the basic theory there. And Tribal Energy Solutions is likewise new, where I think we're 2 years old, 3 years old, something like that.
Yeah, a couple years old. Yep. And the first question was for.
First question.
Oh, yeah,
was
I mean, just that, I want to hit that math. So Larry, that's like 250,000 people just in your Navajo project.
That's right.
That's amazing. Yeah, in Lighthouse, there are a couple things that I think are starting to emerge. One of the fundamental features of it was workforce development and energy efficiency in the buildings. As you can imagine, many of these buildings are screen porches, as are many of the that's a metaphor, but we have the cheapest energy in the country and yet the highest energy bills. Why is that? That's because most of our buildings are very inefficient. And so one of the features...
Wait, can you say that again? The cheapest...
Yeah, we have the cheapest electricity, but the highest energy bills as a portion of your income.
Interesting.
Yeah, so when you see energy poverty in the Southeast, it tends to track that way, and it provides for lots of opportunities for energy providers to brag about the cheap energy, but not about the actual bottom line to the homeowner, to the household.
Got it.
And so one of the things we're doing, and many of these churches are more like a house than they are a commercial property. And so one thing we're trying to do is educate and work with some of the K-12 and workforce pathway nonprofits, many of which have grown up in the last 20 years since Katrina, to put kids who are in high school into apprenticeships that could yield pathways into these careers. As we start to think about the electrification of the appliances and the vehicles on the balance sheets of these institutions, that expands it even more.
Yeah,
whether it's EV technology, or whether it's heat pumps, or whether it's induction stoves, or whether it's battery breaker upgrades. When we start to really look at what does the electrification of that community or just that building, some pretty cool stuff. So I think that's probably the most interesting thing for me that's starting to get a little bit of flywheel momentum, which is, wait a minute, we can continue to build on this base of solar and storage to continue to electrify the things we use as a community.
I think it's really cool too. But I also think that the electrification of America you run the risk of leaving behind communities of color, and impoverished communities especially, right? Sustainability initiatives oftentimes, whether intentionally or not, lead to gentrification.
That's right.
Causes the cost of living to go up in many of these places. And so I think if you're developing these types of projects intentionally in a way that you're going out of your way to make sure that that doesn't happen, I think that's critical. But I think a lot of what we're talking about today is it's uniquely American in the West, right? When you look at Western Europe, much of Australia, Asia, you don't really have these problems.
That's right.
This is a symptom of American capitalism, is what this is, right?
Well,
So
yeah.
I'm a huge proponent of public power, and so my goal really here, it's not the goal of the company I helped build. My personal mission is to help these tribes set up as many tribal utility authorities as possible, and then get the states to recognize these tribal utility authorities the same way that they recognize municipal utility districts, so that we can start to chip away at IOU service territory, take away the profit from, why is there a profit motive at all when you're delivering, a completely necessary service, right?
Public good.
Yeah, public good, right. And let alone to put that profit motive in the hands of a company who has this service monopolized, right, and sanctioned by the states. It makes no sense to me. This doesn't operate this way anywhere else. And so while your story is amazing, I love these lighthouses and this collection of small microgrids around New Orleans. Without the churches, without the nonprofit, or in your case, without some rich, random guy who decides to take an interest in it, none of this stuff happens, right? Why is that the case in America? The government is failing us. Corporate America is failing. And, tribes are in a unique position. For me, this is why it's especially interesting and motivating, is because real change can happen because tribes are sovereign entities, right? Well, if you go to the lower Ninth Ward, that's not a sovereign entity. And these are the people who need it just as badly as, any tribe around the country. who's coming to organize that group of people who truly need the support and help? I don't see anybody coming on the horizon unless it's the church or, nonprofits, but it's just a systemic, really depressing issue when you look at it coast to coast. So I just stay laser focused on my little niche here where I know I can make a significant amount of change and help in a short period of time. But yeah, I'd love to be able to, expand this philosophy beyond just this little niche.
Yeah, for sure. Larry, you want to make a point there?
I was going to say there's an interesting legal question that comes out, legal and moral question that comes out of what Ken just said, which is, is electricity a paid-for service, or is it a right? Right? Is it something that you should just naturally have a right to? When the electric system was first being built 100 years ago, well, it was a luxury, right? I mean, most people could burn candles instead of having an electric light. But, that world has very definitely changed. There is not a single business that you can run nowadays without electricity, really. And there's all kinds of need for electricity for just basic living, let alone if you're on dialysis or something like that. And so maybe we need to start looking at what this is in a very different light. And that's going to take law, policy, change that needs to come from a groundswell. And, so I think that that's going to be a frontier where current students and people who are interested in seeing energy justice be done, that could be the front by which to push it. I also had a question for Ken. I know there's a question here, but one of the things that the current administration has very clearly done is shut down a lot of DEI initiatives. But the argument ought to be that with tribes, it's not a DEI issue because this is, in fact, a treaty obligation.
Yeah, I testified to that fact in front of Congress earlier this year. I don't necessarily mean to completely step on you as you're asking a question.
No, that's okay. But it is backed up by the, unfortunately, dissenting opinion by Justice Gorsuch in the Supreme Court in the Colorado River case that was decided just about a year and a half ago. And where he said, we have just completely crushed these people, and we have this as a treaty obligation, that treaties are their own organic source of law and need to be treated as such. It is essentially the Constitution and our treaties that are at the supreme level, and that's far above any other acts of Congress or anything like that. It's beyond a presidential proclamation. These are obligations that need to be respected because we were at war with these people, and this is the treaty obligation. They lived up to their part. We need to live up to ours. Is that actually practically going anywhere?
Yeah, it is, amazingly. I mean, under this administration, it's been incredibly difficult for, all kinds of people, but tribes, I think especially, or certainly tribes. The vast majority of tribes depend on significant amounts of grant funding from the federal government to survive, and a lot of that has dried up overnight, not just for energy, but for everything. People think of, Indian country or sometimes in a way like that they see these big, skyscraper casinos and think that, well, what help do tribes need, right? Well, that's the exception. It's less than 5% of all the 574 federally recognized tribes account for more than 50% of the gaming revenues in this country, right? So if you're a tribe who happened, to get put on a piece of land where, Los Angeles got built next to you, then you're going to be doing much better than a tribe in, like South Dakota or something. And so those gaming revenues, often it kind of skews the perception of tribes, and so they're dependent.
5%.
Yeah, so tribes are really dependent on the federal government, and yes, so I personally made the case to the House Appropriations Subcommittee this year, arguing that tribes should not be viewed in this DEI light. insane that we have to even make this argument, but yeah, it's a government-to-government relationship, right? Tribes have federally recognized sovereign governments, and so they're drying up the grant funds for sure and basic services, but as far as stepping directly on those treaty rights, I haven't seen extreme blatant examples of that yet.
I know we've got tons of questions. Could you guys stick around for a few more minutes
Happy
to
to
do
do so.
questions? That's
Yeah.
great. So I'll formally wrap us, and I just want to go back to what Ken described. Let me just run you through these numbers again. What Colusa looks like on paper. 6 megawatts of nat gas generation. Is that right?
Yeah, we have an internal mandate to start blending 20% hydrogen by 2028 and
Awesome.
to convert to 100% hydrogen by 2030, which keeps me up at night. But
Does
yeah,
anyone
that's the
hear
goal.
that number, 2030? Y'all are on they're on their way towards.
And I'm happy to talk about our hydrogen
Pretty amazing.
developments as well.
Yeah, 1.1 megawatts of solar, a 2 megawatt battery, 4 megawatts of central UPS backup, and take 10 megawatts of diesel. Just zoom out for a second and realize how powerful an example that is to the rest of the country, that when given the autonomy to make their own energy mix, you see Colusa showing us what is 10 to 15 to 20 years into the future. It is a literal time machine for what our grid is attempting to do. And I just want to applaud you, Ken,
Thanks.
for the work you have done there.
Thank you.
And if you have a chance to study it, I will be studying it because it is a remarkable example in megawatts and electrons and in gas that is being burned and increasingly hydrogen, which is clean. Like, truly remarkable, and thank you for your leadership on that. Larry, thank you for picking up the torch and getting the 501c3 launched. These are two amazing endeavors that you should study because I think they give us a glimpse into where we might be headed as a country. So thanks to both of y'all for being here. Thank y'all. Please give yourselves a hand for being here and wrapping up the end of the day. All right, officially over. I don't know if y'all will kick us out of the chairs or not, turn off the mics or turn off the lights, but let's keep it rocking with Q&A, and you're free to go if you'd like to start your evening. John, I think you were there, and then we'll go. Yeah.
So, are your tribal microgrids, are they interconnecting in any way so they have excess power they can sell that to the market?
Yeah.
And second, the follow-up to that would be, a lot of development is currently being shut down due to this administration taking a very hostile view of solar and wind development.
Mhm.
Does the sovereignty issue, because you have sovereignty on that land, does that allow you perhaps to be an alternative place to build out
It was.
renewable generation?
It was. Unfortunately, Interior just released, it's an EO that Interior has to follow that has now very intentionally made it almost impossible to get permitting through BIA for solar or wind on even trust land. So what I said earlier, not accurate, actually. I completely forgot about this executive order. This is their real first attempt at stepping over that line of honoring the relationship that they've got with these tribes. So now, if you want to build, and I have another example, actually, it's terrible. So if you want to build an array or wind on your own sovereign trust ground, there's like a 60-point checklist that they've slapped on top of it that leads all the way up to the desk of the Secretary of Interior. So the Secretary of Interior has to sign off at the very last check mark of this list, which in essence kills solar and wind on tribal lands, which is an incredible overreach into the tribe sovereignty. And so we're fighting that tooth and nail day and night with our lobbyists, but it's going to be we're fighting the entire Trump administration, basically. The Colusa tribe, is this thing still being recorded?
No, but you know what? Let's do this. Let's show some respect to Kayla and Paul and their team, and let's move our session like literally right over there.
Yeah, you got it.
And we'll just keep talking there, but they have a crew ready to break down, so let them do that. And then they said we are free to keep hanging right here. So
Excellent.
let's do that, and Ken, you can keep rolling because I really want to hear the answer to this. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you for joining us for this session.